Okay, so this chapter is very apropos for right now because it basically talks about Mashiach ben Yosef and how he's going to take over the world, basically. And basically what it explains here is that he's going to change the tirufim. And basically he's going to do it through, like you said before, that the whole thing of Tohu was that the Kalim did not hold the lights. This is the thing what the Rebbe said also, that the lights of Tohu in the Kalim of Tikkun. And basically, the main thing of that is after this book, that it basically holds fantastic lights, which the lights of Tohu, the real lights of Tohu, are not even the lights of Tohu, really. The real lights of Tohu are the lights from before the Tzimtzum, actually. That the actual light from before the Tzimtzum comes in without a Tzimtzum, and it breaks everything. And the whole thing of the whole creation was in order to bring it about to a point where after the lights from before the Tzimtzum will be able to come in and will actually be able to be held in the Kalim. And this is Davka in the Kalim of Tikkun, which the basic Kalim of Tikkun are actually the letters of the Torah. And the basic thing of the Kalim of Tikkun is like how the Torah was originally given, was that it was like, even though it was very big lights, but it was like smaller lights were given in very heavy vessels. So, and that refers basically to the Nigla of Torah. That it's the halacha that basically just tells you what to do. And the Torah Shel Mashiach basically is the inyan of that once these Kalim got very strong, actually the original lights will be able to come into it. And this is the whole inyan of the book, like what it explains that the Tzimtzum is not Kipshuta, and how the teacher starts teaching the children small things so that finally he'll be able to teach them the big things.
Right.
And that's the whole thing of what he's going to be talking about here, how to change the Kutnas Or from an Ayin to an Aleph. Achine b'teiros shel Reb Meir haya kosov Kutnas Or be'Aleph. Ulu kanal liot yadua b'shirish pinas hatikim pinas shem ma chadash ta'ak. Ulu. Ukmo shem vod mokam acher shezeu pinas melech hashmini. Shirish hatikim dema dechochma. And this melech hashmini is basically, even though we read all kinds of explanations on it, is still basically nonetheless the Bina and Tvuna of Tohu, which right now, if you look around in the world, you'll see that we are in the time of the Melech Hashmini. That the basic thing right now is basically the age of science. Right now, their God is science. I mean, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
The real God.
Yeah, the ultimate God is...
The ultimate God is science, not even money.
Right.
The ultimate God basically is science. The ultimate God, even by the Yidden already.
Right.
And even by Fruma Yidden, if you cannot make it agree with science, then it doesn't, not only that, the funny thing, I don't know if, like even the thing, like, people, they say the science, and really even the science, I mean, they're not even really following science. It's a messed up science because, like, for instance, the thing of the Earth going around the sun.
Right.
Even according to their theory, and even if you don't include the whole universe in it and stuff like that, this thing, we already talked about it, that two bodies really go around each other.
Right.
It's not a thing that one body is standing still and the other body is moving. It can't be like that. And this is very easily verifiable in a lab environment. And a very simple experiment on it is like, on a wedding, two guys hold hands and spin around.
Right.
And the basic thing is you see that it's not one guy spinning around the other. They're both spinning around where their hands are, around the middle.
Right.
And when there's a heavier body and a lighter body, so it just spins around, the heavier body spins around, but they both spin around each other, but the center of gravity moves closer and closer to the heavier body as it gets heavier.
Right.
So somebody told me, I don't remember who it was, that the actual center of gravity between the Earth and the Sun is like a little bit under the surface of the Sun.
Right.
Not the center of the Sun. It's so close to the Sun that it's a little bit under the surface of the Sun.
Right.
And the same thing with the Earth and the Moon. You can't really say that the Moon is going around the Earth. And we have a perfect proof for it is the tides.
Right.
The sea tides prove to you that the Moon is also exerting a gravitational pull.
Right.
So you see that even there's science, because like most people think that the Sun is stationary.
Well, they know it's going around the galaxy.
Yeah, but in terms of the Sun and the Earth, they see the Sun as stationary.
Well, it's a matter of approximation. If
but most people don't realize that. They don't realize that. They see the Sun as stationary, but really the Sun moves towards the Earth as the Earth goes in its Maslow, and the Sun goes in its Maslow.
Sure.
There's a double Maslow, really.
Right.
Not only that, like they see the whole solar system as a thing with the Sun stationary. It's not really like that, because the planets are pulling the Sun and they're pulling each other.
Right.
So it's not really stationary. Not only that, another thing is even if you call it stationary for the what do you call it? For the like you said, for simplification. Like how you see, like
right.
Like in the models, they make the Sun with a bunch of things spinning around. They seem to have an exact Maslow.
Right.
And it can't be because when Mars is on the same side as us, the two pull each other. And
right.
it moves it out of its Maslow a little bit. It's not a straight Maslow. It can't be a straight Maslow. If you think about it, it isn't. And not only that, even if you say that the Moon is going around the Earth, it's moving the Earth, so the Earth, like, for instance, is going really not in a straight line like they say, but, like one of the things that made fun of the old way of looking at it is it said it was like elliptical.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Like a pig's tail, like a screw. You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen
I was at one of these libraries.
Yeah.
And they had a book that showed the orbits of the planets according to the Talmud.
Right. And it's like
according to the Aristotelian astronomy and so on.
Right, and it's like a screw, right?
It's have you seen those toys where they make all these funny designs going around and around?
Right.
That's what it looks like. It's
right.
It's elliptical.
Okay, but the thing is that even according,
the very beautiful designs that it makes.
Right. Okay, but the thing is that the what do you call it? The muscle, even according to their thing, it can't be straight because the moon is supposedly going around the Earth, so it's got to move the Earth, and it's got to go like a screw.
Right.
It doesn't go straight.
The only mile of saying that the sun is the center that the orbits become more elegant.
It's not so much elegance. It's a matter. It makes it easier to. It makes it easier to calculate.
That's what I mean by elegant.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Okay, but even according to their own theories of relativity, it's lavdavka. It depends where you stand. If you stand on Earth, you can do the whole thing as if it's all going around the Earth. And the real thing is that this doesn't allow for various other things. In other words, it's sort of like a simplistic system. I mean, what about the galaxy Andromeda? How does that? That also exerts a pull. What about the stars? The stars exert a pull.
Right, the whole galaxy exerts a pull.
Everything exerts a pull, and there's a certain center to the galaxy, and that's really in Jerusalem. But that's besides the point.
Well, as far as centers of galaxies, the big news today, astronomically, was that the center of the galaxy is a big black hole, and they observed that it basically swallowed up a star the size of our sun.
Right.
That didn't actually swallow it up. It swallowed about half of it.
Right. So, but the basic thing that's only of a certain galaxy.
This galaxy.
Yeah, but there's more galaxies.
Yeah, there's. I just saw a picture today of a whole bunch of galaxies all together. They look like like a big circle with the trillions of galaxies in it.
Right. And you don't know what else is there. So
there are galaxy clusters.
Right, and then they don't even know what's outside. There's stuff that they don't even know. They don't see. Like the Mittler Rebbe says that there's infinite stars. It's that some of the tzaddikim were able to see the stars that are beyond any kind of visible telescope or anything like that. There's more stuff out there.
Well, it's not only that, out from above the heavens.
Not only that, they don't know, there could be some kind of a piece of thing there that has a ridiculously big mass that moves the whole center of gravity over very heavily. You don't really know.
Right.
But that's besides the point. I mean, what is really true and what is really not true, that's not what we're talking about here. The main thing that we're talking about here is that the God right now is the Melech Hashmini, science.
Right. That's correct.
Which science, what science
that's their big God.
That's their God, right?
That's the big God, yeah.
That's the big God. The Nilus.
Right.
And not only that, the second God, money, is also dependent on the first God of science.
Right.
That's where the big, Bill Gates and all that stuff,
Right. All the, the money is coming from the
right,
science.
Right. And even the big money that's coming to music and to Oprah and stuff like that, that also depends on technology.
Right.
That's why, a little girl like in the olden days of Shakespeare, the most she could have been is some little traveling singer who would get pennies in her hat.
Right.
And the reason like these people can become so big is because of the technology.
Right.
So even that depends on science. If not for science, you couldn't have the Beatles.
Right.
I mean, I'm not even talking about the fact that the electric music is also dependent on science. That big, heavy, heavy metal beat.
Right.
So the secondary God is also dependent. The primary God is science. And what science is, and we talked about this before, the real thing that science is the scientific method. Anybody who's a real scientist will know that science is not really a philosophy,
right,
or even a body of knowledge.
It's a methodology.
It's a methodology. And what that methodology is, if you look closely at it, it's Hitbonenut.
Right.
Analysis. Taking the thing apart into its particular pieces that make it up.
Right.
It's its components.
Right.
In other words, like the matter, they're trying to take matter apart into its components, like atoms, and what the difference, like for instance, the atomic table.
Right.
Same thing like with psychology or something. They're trying to take the mind apart into its basic components.
Right.
Same thing, the physiological and biological sciences and stuff like that.
Right.
So the basic thing, if you look at it, it's what it is. It's exactly it's Hitbonenut. Basically,
right.
You take the thing apart, and then you come up with a svara.
Right.
A svara means an explanation. You say, well, it must be like this. And this svara, they call a theory.
Right.
A hypothesis or a theory. And then you take the svara exactly like in Talmud. You say, well, okay, so Maus Mefuzaras. You're saying that Yehush Midas or Yehush Lo Midas, so you have your svara and I have my svara, a theory. And how does this apply? I mean, over there, the axiomatic thing is the Mishnah.
Right.
That it says in the Mishnah that Maus Mefuzaras. And what science does is, they take the svara and then they test it against physical reality.
Right.
To say, according to your svara, if we take a balloon and keep blowing it up, it should explode.
Right.
So let's try it out. And we say we keep blowing the balloon up, boom, it explodes. Hey, so that is a proof that your svara could be right. Not that it is right, by the way.
Right.
It could be right.
Right.
In other words, we didn't disprove it.
Right.
If there's a thing like, let's say, according to your svara, we can blow up the balloon and it won't explode. So when it explodes, that disproves your svara completely.
Right.
And you see that this is basically Hitbonenut.
Right.
Which is Bina Shebabina. And along with that, along with the scientific method, the way that the scientific method we have today is not just in the Greek way. It's the American way.
Right.
Which is Bina Shababina with Tvuna Shabatvuna.
Right.
In other words, that then we take these theories that we come up with that seem to be to have a very high probability of being correct. And again, by the science, there's only a high probability of being correct. Means that we ran several experiments and we didn't disprove it.
Right.
And then we tried to apply it to various things. And we apply it to various things in order to come up with the second God, which is, in a way, sometimes it's really the first God.
Right.
Which is called Mammon.
Right.
You know, but the thing of this secondary God is basically, in a way, has become sort of Tvuna Shabatvuna. In other words, to apply the Bina Shababina in order to come up with a better solutions all the way down to earth.
Right.
So that even the sheep will be able to make use of these theories that they might not even understand, like driving a car or getting on a computer and talking to somebody on the other side of the world.
Right.
And stuff like that. So we see that the basic thing is that the Melech HaShmini is where we're at now, but the Melech HaShmini, in other words, they're saying Shoresh HaTikun Dema Chochma. But that's really the Melech HaShmini after he gets fixed up. And mostly the Kabbalistic books don't really tell you that. They sort of take the Melech HaShmini as if he's already fixed up, which is Yosef Pesach Halayim.
Right.
You know, but really the Melech HaShmini is the 8th king of Toihu.
Right.
He's not a king of Tikkun. Even though he's the Shoresh of the whole Tikkun, but he himself is a king of Toihu.
Right.
Not only is a king of Toihu, he's the Melech HaShmini of Toihu. With the Shmini, not only includes the whole 7, but is way past the whole 7.
Right.
Is a whole different level. Shalom Be'erach.
Right.
And again, we see that today, that from this Melech HaShmini is coming things that are totally Shalom Be'erach.
Right.
The basic point is that we're very obviously right now in the kingdom of the 8th king of Toihu. And it's the kingdom of the 8th king of Toihu, how he is Be'etzem, not how he gets fixed up.
Right.
How he is originally.
Right.
So that not only does he include inside of himself all the bad kings, which you see that he includes all the bad, all the worst things, so that the lust for money and the lewdness and the Indian of conquering other nations and false din. And basically, like you see that actually, in a way, it's much worse. All of the emotional bad kings are actually now even worse than they were before. Why? Because the 8th king includes all of them.
Right.
So, like, he brought it, like, for instance, we see that in terms of the lewdness is worse than it ever was before. It was never to this point.
Right.
You know, the lewdness and also another thing is that the availability of the lewdness.
Right.
And also the availability of everything, and it's all part of the 8th king of Toihu.
Right.
Not only that, the availability for terrorism. I mean, there was always such a thing.
Right.
But now it's getting to a point where the 8th king of Toyu is making available that a guy can come up with like what they did with the Twin Towers.
Right.
They wouldn't have been able to do this in the old days. The basic thing, we see that we're in the time of the Melech Hashmini. However, this same Melech Hashmini is also the Shoresh HaTikun, the Mad Chochmah.
Right.
Why? Because when you have Hitbonenut, like we learned in the chapter 1 and stuff like that, when you have Hitbonenut, it will definitely get you to the truth, slowly. It might get you, first of all, to the wrong svaras, but as you test the svaras, and don't just accept them, that's one thing. Another thing is that this thing of the availability of these methods of the 8th king are made available not just to Osama, but to us also.
Right.
So, like, for instance, the basic thing, what we are doing, even like 20 years ago would have been impossible. We wouldn't have been able to do this. We would not have been able to basically reach as many people as we did. But the thing is that right now we are available to the world. Literally. We're available to the world. And why are we available to the world is because of the 8th king of Tohu.
Right.
That's why we're available to the world. And not only that, another thing of the 8th king of Tohu is that it's like a total Tohu of ideas. And the Nile of the 8th king of Tohu is the internet.
Right.
We call it the data flow, the thing of the information flow.
Right.
It's the Nile. That's the lifeblood of the 8th king of Tohu. And the basic thing of the 8th king of Tohu is that he includes inside of himself all the bad stuff.
Right.
Like, for instance, the Tower of Babel.
Right.
Tower of Babel, there's a whole tumult of many tongues.
Right.
And many ideas.
Right.
A whole Bilbo.
Right.
If I ask you, where do you find that nowadays? The internet.
Right.
A whole big billboard with everybody saying different things.
Right.
And basically all of these things, like the Kishuf. Kishuf is also on the internet. Everything's on the internet.
Right.
Kishuf, lewdness, whatever you want. If you want the big things on it, you go on the internet. And Dafka that is what is now giving it a possibility. See, before the 8th king of Tohu, somebody who lived in Tibet or something like that,
Right.
would not have been able to know what somebody else is saying.
Right.
So one of the things of the 8th king of Tohu, and this is the basic thing of Bina Shababina, is that it considers all the opinions.
Right.
Even the wrong ones.
Right.
That's the whole thing. That's the whole Indian of Bina Shababina, is that you look at you come up with all the svaras. A svara, in order to be a svara, does not have to be true or correct.
Right.
It can be anything.
Right.
You can say, I have a svara that there's little green people that are walking behind me.
Right.
Is that a svara? Yes, a svara. It can very easily be disproved. Have somebody else look behind me and you'll see that they're not there. Unless I come up with a new svara, because they're invisible.
Right.
But it's a svara. So the thing is that what's happening on the internet, and this is the thing of the 8th king of Tohu, is he looks at all the svaras and he compares them.
Right.
And anybody is free to compare any svara. It's not like before. Before it wasn't like that. You weren't allowed to think other svaras.
Right.
You had to go by the regular svaras. You couldn't just come up and say, well, what about this other svara? Well, you're not allowed to think that svara. If you try to think that svara, it will kill you.
Right.
But now you're allowed to think all the svaras. So, therefore, it's coming to a point that even like forbidden things like Kabbalah, which was always, even when other things are allowed, that was forbidden, is now becoming an allowed thing.
Right.
And that's why this same Melech Hashmini, who is the worst of the kings of Toyu, is also Huvahu Prinat Yosef Peitach HaLoimis. He is actually Yosef Peitach HaLoimis. That, and you say, well, how is it that the eighth king actually changes into him? He says, if you would give him a long time, like they say, 15 billion years, maybe he could change into it. But the thing is that the eighth king is connected to Yosef Peitach HaLoimis in the fact that he gives an opening to everybody. There's no svara that he's not willing to entertain.
Right.
And that's the saving grace of the eighth king of Tohu, by the way.
Right.
The saving grace of the eighth king of Tohu is that they're willing to listen to anybody.
Right.
Even to the rabbis. And people are starting to, because of this, it's turning out that the craziest people are starting now to become attracted to rabbinical Kabbalah. Also, another thing that he lets happen is that, like what the Rebbe said, before you couldn't tell about the 7 mitzvahs.
Right.
But now you can, because it's the eighth king of Tohu. You can tell anybody anything.
Right.
Total Tohu. It's total, absolute Tohu. That's what the eighth king of Tohu is. And the Dafka, he is Yosef Peitach HaLoimis. Why? Ki agolos nimshal lecholam, shehu me'ein hirhura liba dezo. And by the way, by the eighth king of Tohu now, in the olden days, under the first 7 kings, people could fool themselves in the dream to think that it's a reality.
Right.
To think that it's a normal thing to be like this.
Right.
Under whichever king of Toyu they were. But now it's getting to a point that everybody knows that something is wrong.
Right.
The Cholam is already not from the 7 kings. The Cholam is not from the 8th king. So it's total Toyu.
Right.
In other words, it's a total nightmare. It's not just a nice little dream anymore.
Right.
Before you had a nice little dream from this king of Toyu, a nice little dream from that king of Toyu. Now it's the 8th king of Toyu, and nobody knows what's going on anymore. It's a total nightmare. Nobody knows what's happening next. So it's like total chaos. Absolute and total chaos. Shehu b'pchinat sheina nika dormisa, Hishtalshelut hamoichin. Chulu. ומאיסיה שבדים מן החולם מצרף בהם צירופים טובים מתוקנים על פי מוקר עמק החוכמה דאק שבמצווה חולו. In other words, Tafka, according to the mokar of the Emek HaChochma, which is in the Pnimius Ak. In other words, in the Moichen Ak. Which the Moichen Ak is according to the Machshava Keduma, which was the original plan for the whole world.
Right.
And that's what Yosef Peitach HaLoimis does. He says, well, all of these things, here's the explanation for them. It's like this.
Right.
In other words, why is this happening, why is that happening, and why is it so crazy like this? I said, well, what do you mean? It's supposed to be, because it explains it right here. We're in the time of the 8th king of Toyu. What do you expect to happen in the time of the 8th king of Toyu? Zehu Toifer Oisius. Toifer is the same thing of Toifer.
Right.
Ois Peiros, what's it? Ben Peiros Yosef, Upeiser. V'lachen Nikra Avrech. And that's why it's called the Avrech. Avrech, I mean, there's various things. One is, one thing of Avrech is to bring down, Birkayim, which that's the whole thing in Yitkadal V'Tadash Me Rabbah.
Right.
And what is it? You say, Baruch Hashem, Me'a'ilam V'Da'ilam, means to bring down.
Right.
Then that's what you say, Amen Yehesh Me Rabbah Mavorach. They said the Shmei Rabbah is the Machshav Akduma. The Machshav Akduma should be Mavorach. So maybe that's why it says Avrech. The other thing, Avrech means Av and Rech is king.
Right.
He's the father of the king. That means that really so what do you mean? He's Yosef Peter Chaloimis. He's the 8th king of Toil. Yeah, that's before the Birurim. But after the Birurim, the Rapach Nitzayt Shinaflu, Gamkem in Piru V'Pizra Oisius, once you take these letters and put them back together again, then he's Yosef Peter Chaloimis.
Right.
Oisius V'Kel Nitzayt Kanal, V'Seichel HaMetumtum, Ba'is HaNifrad. Why? Because they couldn't fit the big iris into the Seichel HaMetumtum, and therefore it broke up into all these crazy ideas of Avodah Zarah, and all these Meshuggah ideas. All these Meshuggah ideas are from the Pirur that they couldn't hold it. I mean, you see that all these people are trying to arrive at the truth, but they can't fit it into their brain.
Right.
So they're coming up with some kind of a crazy mishigas. But nonetheless, you see that it's the age of the 8th king of Toyu, that they're trying to figure out what's going on. That's the whole thing of Bina Shavabina. Like we talked about before, that Bina Shavabina wants to know the truth. That's the whole Indian of Bina Shavabina, right?
Right.
And that's the whole Indian of science. This Indian of science, the whole thing of science is you want to know after the truth.
Right.
That's the real thing. If you ask a pure scientist, not an applied science. Not Tvuna Shabbatvuna. What is the pure science? That you want to know the truth. By the 7 kings, it's lavdavka like that. You don't care to know the truth, you just care to steal money.
Right.
You don't care what the truth is, it's the opposite. You lie to them. You don't care what the truth is. As long as you get all the money, you don't care what the truth is.
Right.
But over here, the whole thing is to get at the truth. But since it's a Seichel Metzumtzum Ba'is HaNifrad, so therefore it covers up on the truth, and it's with an ayin. But then when Yosef Peter Chaloimis comes and tells them how it all fits together, so then people say, oh, that's right. Then the coverings become coverings of light. And that's what's going on. You can see the chashmal running around the world. And that's basically all these demons that are running around with these crazy ideas are basically chashmal. And what's a chashmal? Like we said, the chashmal comes from the chitzonius bina, and it covers up on the midos. It keeps the midah going. In other words, it's the idea without the brains now.
Right.
In letters. So that, like, for instance, the terrorists are running around, they want to do this and do that, right?
Right.
They're not sitting around thinking, hey, wait a minute, is this business correct?
Right.
There's no E in there. They just accepted a chashmal, and the chashmal is running their life. There's a demon that possesses them.
Right.
Basically, right?
Exactly.
The demon possessing them. Same thing like with the missionaries that are trying to convert the Jews. if they would think about it, but they don't think about it. They're going with a chashmal.
Right.
Hare uba b'pinas hakshama dafka. More inyan hamashal and nimshal. In other words, the thing is, the idea has to come into hakshama, and then when it comes to hakshama, then what happens is that you take the mashal for the nimshal, and therefore the mashal covers up on the nimshal instead of revealing the nimshal.
Right.
And kutnas or means that the mashal reveals the nimshal. Like this was all talked about earlier. And that's what Neiga is. In other words, this is the klippa. the thing of the klippa comes from the chashmal. K'mo oyer hameir ba'afela, she'oyer nika sham yeser. Ad shenir oyer mavik b'yeser ma'oyer hameir b'mokam eira. K'mo she'amru shraga b'tihara mai mahani. A candle at noontime, what is it good for? But at the middle of the night, when it's totally black, then a candle is very bright. You can see everything with it. And that's basically like, also like what we are, that the thing, if we would have stood in some of the older generations, we would have been nothing.
Right.
Because a little candle at noontime, but if we would have been in the days of Shlomo Melech, nobody would have noticed us. I don't think we'd even reach the level of the Three Stooges in those days.
Right.
But in our days, we're like the only light around, because it's such a dark thing that the minute that somebody sees our light, they say, "Wow, look, there's a light over there." And then it lights up the whole darkness.
Right.
Not only that, it looks like a fantastically big light. And it's very nikar.
Right.
Sheyev shalom ba'era ner mitzad asmo shemavik eira be'etzem b'choshech laila yoser mibayim v'ayin l'tvisha hu meir et ha'choshech v'afel adapta. Sheyev shalom ba'era ner mitzad asmo shemavik eira be'etzem b'choshech laila yoser mibayim. You can't say that, well, look at this candle. In the daytime, it was hardly giving off light, and look how much light it's giving off now. No, it's giving off exactly the same light. It's just mitzad ha'choshech, because of the choshech shui puchoi, al ken nika b'yeser eir. Therefore, you can see the light more. Ve'ein zu avhaka mitzvah mitzad asmo. It's not that itself is really any brighter. Rak shenir la'ayin ka'avhaka yeser. There, there's a yitron or for the people who see it dafka. And that's why also the shining of a diamond is more shiny than shininess in the air. Even though the air is more zach. But the shininess, the sparkle, you see dafka in a diamond, because a diamond is a more glass thing. It shines, it sparkles.
Right.
Okay, go ahead. The tape is rolling.
And it was a thing, Shraga B'Tihara, And yeah, and then the diamond shines more because it's the flamer.
That we didn't do yet.
Yeah, we did. That was the last thing we did. That was the last.
Yeah, we did.
Okay. that the shining in a diamond is more than in the air, even though the air is a purer thing than a diamond.
Right.
But the air doesn't sparkle. After a diamond, when the sunshine shines through the air, since it's totally refined, so it just goes right through it.
Right.
And it's dafka by a diamond that it sparkles because it's magusham.
Right.
And that now we are about a quarter down the page, and there's a parenthesis. V'ka'avonos v'asogis v'tachlis omek ora seichel b'moshel zar. So who inyan gas v'zar dafka metam zechulu, that you get the feeling and see the light of the tachlis omek seichel dafka in a very gas mashal, and of a totally different thing.
Right.
And that's why you see it is dafka. The more you magash on the mashal, like especially like on the mashalim, like when we turn it into a cat.
Right.
Not just koyach hatnuah. I mean, even koyach hatnuah is already a mashal zar and magusham. But
Right.
when you magashim it totally all the way and say like a cat,
Right.
that's much more than just when you say like machshava kduma, which machshava kduma is also really a mashal.
Right.
וזהו בחינת נויגה שיש לה בייס פירושים כידוע. האחד מעניין נויגה oir means a shining of light, or yagia chashki, he'll light up my darkness. Ukahai gavna, but noiga doesn't mean like a bright light. It means like a shining, a mild shining.
A glow.
A glow, right. Ukahai gavna. Ve'abes loshen blita, lachutz. K'mo shenemar kasher hoige min hamisila. Somebody veers off the path.
Right.
They can hoige es HaShem. Somebody who says the name.
Right.
More higoyan shemachshava. What's the thing of higoyan? Higoyan means when the machshava is in a way that it sticks out in a way that you can feel it.
Right.
Moshemar v'hagisa boy. V'ken the hegyan libi, when the thought is boiled out in the heart.
Right.
And they're both really, the glow and the blita is the same thing, really.
Right.
Like a glow is also, it's a blita of light, basically.
Right.
Al derech dugma me'er hashemesh hameir ba'anan she'oiro muchbal sham v'nikar hu sham b'yeser mishenikar beguf hashemesh atzmai. That, you know, when the light shines through the cloud, then you can actually see the ray of light. You can actually see that it's a ray of light.
Right.
Whereas if there's no clouds, you can't see that there's actually rays of light.
Right.
You can't see like the direction that it actually, like for instance, like traveling in a straight line. It just looks like there's light everywhere. And certainly in the Guf HaShemesh itself, you can't see that there's a light separate from the sun. Ki mipnei hizdakachut geshem ha'anan shebehakovat chelke hamayim sheboi yukar sham ha'or bekol pratich haloka b'yesher. And this is especially what he's saying now, not so much besides the fact of when it shines through and you can see that there's a ray, but when it turns it into a rainbow. When it turns into the rainbow, you can actually see the parts.
Right.
What you can't see without that. בהרכבת חלק המים, שבו יוקר שם האור בכל פרוטי חלוקה ביסר, כמו גימל גבנה קשת, שנקרא מראה הנויגה. That's called a mare הנויגה. Because it's a noiga, because it has to go through a thing, so therefore, Kamari Akeshes. The Marga noiga is like the Mari Akeshes. That it breaks it up, because of the noiga, it breaks it up into where you can see its parts. Kamari Akeshes, Chulu ken Mari Anoiga, Chulu. Ukmo prate chalke gavonin shebe'eben toiv, lo nika yafe kolkaf, כי אם ביסה מורכה באיזה חומר. אך לא בחומר גס, אלא בחומר זך ותולו שיאביק אורה ביסה. But not in a totally gas, so that's the thing of klipas noiga means it is not totally gas like it's the klipas atuma. But dafka when it's a chomer, but it's a chomer zach. Like a diamond. A diamond is a chomer, but it's not like, in other words, if you have a piece of lead, then it won't sparkle. It's dafka when it's a chomer zach. It has to be a chomer because like when it's air, then it won't sparkle either. It'll just go right through it. So it has to be a chomer, but it has to be a chomer zach. וכך הוא עניין הבס שבפירוש נויגה, שהוא בחינת הבליטה בגשם זך, that is the sticking out, dafka in a geshem zach, like the light sticks out in the diamond. Shenizdak sat, that it's a little bit purified. Sham bal vayga ark mo yagia chashki dafka, v'ken higyan b'machshava iyunis. Sheba orasechel b'pinat blita lachutz b'geshem ha'isi. Dafka in the geshem ha'isi, shihar machshava, she'az dafka nikar musag be'aras oimek asechel yesir. And this is also with people, the thing of the chaymer. You know, if you need chaymers, so you could have animals. And if you need zaf, you can have angels. So what do you need? You don't need, it doesn't work now with angels and now with animals. What you need is people, but the people have to purify themselves.
Right.
And dafka then, the divine light shines the most. When it has to be dafka chaymer, people in a physical body, not angels.
Right.
And by the people with a physical animal body, and then they mezachach the animal nature, and dafka there is the big blita of the elokus. And in the machshava iyunis is dafka when it's the iyun puts it into the length of the iyun, bringing it down into letters and mashalim. At dafka there is the eimek asechel sticks out more. B'zeh shemar v'hagisa bay cholu. In other words, to do the Hitbonenut in a way of bringing it down into the mashalim and etc. V'hainu gamkin kmo inyan mashalim. Shaboilet u'musak sham oira sechel yeser kanal. Vehi pchinas noiged ezes firas chulu. Bichlal, shezeu pchinas hayeshus hamorgish u'boilet. The actual somethingness that is felt and sticks out. Al derech hamvua v'mokam acher be'inyan ra'ita ish chacham be'einav, like a person who's wise in his own eyes, what do you call that? Not arrogant. How do you call that?
Conceited.
The conceited person, right? Hayesh, you know.
Right.
Ken upilaksho shma ra'uma. What is ra'uma? Ra'ushani batul. Look what I am. Look at me how holy I am.
Right.
Ukis labus elokis morgeshes. And like I felt, it's labus elokus, like what it explains in Kuntisite Pilus, that to stay away from that kind of stuff. And that's the inyan of a yesh. And it's dafka when you mizachach that yesh, that you get the real blita of the divine light. The kol zeh shoyrish pinat chashmal shenase mechitzonius abina, and this whole thing is the shoyrish of the chashmal. The chashmal comes out from chitzonius bina. In other words, the letters that stick out, and you have the chashmal, which the chashmal then has its own life. And then the chashmal gets transferred over, so that the chashmal becomes the ratzon by the next person, and he doesn't even think about it. There's no the chashmal can go without to make up a whole ratzon without his Hitbonenut in the first place, which is what happens, and that's how Tohu continues basically.
Right.
As a matter of fact, what could happen, and that's what it explains in the various, like Rashis and stuff like that, about in the early generations, that because it was a chashmal, so it tends to deteriorate. And what, like a first generation makes up mashallah so that they can chop the light better, and then the chashmal goes over, and by the third or fourth generation, it's like a broken telephone effect, where they grasp the chitzonius of the mashal and don't know what it relates to.
Right. That's how the Rambam explains how the Avodah Zarah started out in the first place.
Yeah, that's what I said. Rashi also basically says, well, the Mefarshim, they explain that's how it works, right. And it's not just the Avodah Zarah, a lot of things. You see even in, like, things that start off, like, even in the bad stuff, like, even, like, real bad stuff like communism, in a way, if it started off from a good intention. And you see there's a lot of these things, like abortion, it's starting off with a good intention.
Right.
And it ends up as killing your own children, which is the worst possible thing that could happen. That's
right.
You know what it says about that they ate the kid.
Right.
You know the story?
Yeah.
With Eitzadas?
Yeah.
That the Sultan gave him a kid and they ate him?
Right.
And that's basically it. Like right now, what do these people do? They don't want to have the kids. Why? Because the parnasa will get less.
Right.
So basically what they're doing is they're eating the kid.
Right.
And the same thing with, like, the way the whole thing is worked in terms of the, like, national credit and stuff like that. So they're basically building up this credit that's going to the next generation.
Right.
So they're, like, eating their kids in a way.
Right.
So where are we here?
We call that Shoresh Pinat HaShmal Shnei
Pinat Shnasem Mechitzonius Abina Shemizeh Nasu Pchinas HaKnafayim. That's called the Knafayim of Bina. Kmo Shemar Gazol of Yerachev. Ima Priestess Gatfaha. That the mother spreads her wings over the chickies. In other words, over the midos, like we said, that the chashmal of Bina is what protects the midah. And what's the chashmal of Bina is like the basic marshal on that is like the McCoys and the what's the names?
Hatfields.
Hatfields and the McCoys, right. That the chashmal of Bina is what holds the hatred in place. That it's not anymore that actually that they know even what the original incident even was.
Right.
It's just the B'chein from the Chitzonius Bina keeps the Midah in place.
V'nikra kanfei shchina.
V'nikra kanfei shchina shemisham shorish nishmas hagerim. That's the way the neshamas of the great gerim come from. Zeh gam ken ina mamar zor al pi boiker rochel chava atzape. David itkin hay chuppah lechapah boiker de Yosef. This David made this chuppah to cover up on the boiker of Yosef, if you say. In other words, Malchus is covering up the light of the Yosef. The Abid Nahira litlab shachulu, and makes a light to become enclosed in. Ad inun de ikron kanfin iloin chuluk moshe nemar ba'erev makamacher, which I don't know. This is something, and he's basically bringing up a thing in Zohar that basically is talking about this Indian here. So the Chashmal of Bina, which starts off as a light, a kutnos or, turns into a kutnos or with an ayin, where it becomes a masach which covers up the light. Where the original thing, the Inyan Zar, was actually clarified the thought, and it made it boil it out more. But then it gets, the grubkeit gets more and more, so that it turns from a chaymer zach to a chaymer akur. So he's telling you here basically how the Tohu came into being. This relates, by the way, to the beginning of the chapter with the king of Tohu.
Right.
He's telling you how the Tohu came into being and covered up more and more of it till the Midos became Midos of Tohu, until finally it got to the point that even the Bina is Bina of Tohu. Because now it's even worse than in past generations, actually. So that even the Midos are worse, so that, like, they're already going to, things that were lewd and stuff like that, even back then, like Ma'aseh Mitzrayim, and it's not even considered Ma'aseh Mitzrayim anymore. It's considered actually goodness.
Right.
I mean, like a person who is against it, it's like, well, what do you mean?
Right.
I mean, what do you mean? You hate people? I mean,
right.
it's like bad. If you're
right.
against it, means you're bad. You're one of these bad people.
You're a bigot.
A bigot, right. And he's basically describing here how there's the degeneration. And before he said that the eighth king will turn into Yosef Poitach Haloimis and will straighten it out. Once he puts the letters back in place, the letters of Chashmal, because the letters of Chashmal actually really clarify the light.
Right.
That's how they originated. They came out in a way from the Machshava Iyunis in order to clarify the light. But then they got mixed up, and they got separated with a puror after puror, until it became a total Masach Mamish. Anikra Parsa Hamavsik Umavdil Ben Atzilus Ubriya, and then it stops it. The Malchus Bakea Masach Moshid Bar, and then the Malchus can go through the Masach. Ach Inyan Kotnas Or Be'alef, so that's the Inyan of the Kotnas Or Be'ayin. or be'alef, hu achar atikun abir de b'chinat noiga de chashmal, shu al yidei b'chinat bitu la'atzmi dama chadash da'ak. Ulu shayrish atikun now. Through the eighth king of Tohu turning over, through the new Shema of Ak, meaning that he comes up with a new shame of the Midos. That the Ma is the name of the Midos, basically. And it's also in Koyach Ma, which means that the Midos are bottled according to Seichel. And in other words, it's like by Baal Tshuva, in other words, that he comes up with a new Shem Ma, that he has a new idea of what his midos should be like. And this is the Shevish HaTikun, Ad Shenepach Prinat HaYesh HaMurgash HaNoiga Bepchinas Bitul Le'ein Mamish. Until the felt Yesh of Noiga, in a way of Bitul, turns to actual Ein. But it's not just the Ein, it's Hayesh that's the Ein. Because Hayesh hu b'bchinas Ein, hu Yesid Nale mebchinas Ein demash b'choch ma'avare. Then it's even higher than when the Ein is the Ein. And that's also the Indian that Bina can go really higher than Chochmah, because when Bina can go to the Ein, it's going there in a way of a Yesh, that he can mamish explain the whole thing. Moshe V'or B'mokam Acher Alkel Nikrin Kotnas Or Mo Oise Erkasal Oite Erkasalma Ulushahu Pinas Or the Teira L'Acha Bir Demad Chochmei La Shemavar L'Pinas Ban de Noiga. That when the light of the Torah makes the Birurim of Chochmei Law, that is Mevarer, the Ban of Noiga, means it's Mevarer, the Indian of Dacia and the Elam Asiya, all the way till it makes it into a fixed up Torah thing. Sha'ele L'Mailam B'Pinas Ma'chulu, that it brings the Shem Ban up the Sak. They do the Sak, Shahu Gas, Sag, when it's broken, it's called Gas. Boraya Shvira, the Shvira was Davka in the Bechain of the Bina, in the Chitzonius Bina. Aril Acha Abir the Ban Shanafel Meshvira Sakelim Oile B'Shosha B'Pchinat Sak Hulu L'Mayla Meshem Ma'Hulu. The Nikra Zihara Ilah, then it's called the upper light. Al Derech Marshal, Ora Mezuchach B'Yezer Al Vush Zachu Boyer Adna Oid. Shal Yodav Davka Yecholim L'Istakel B'Toisfes Abhirus V'Avhaka Ba'ayin Hefech Inyan the Noya Koidem Abiru Shuhu Behester Achoysha. Rak Shemitzad Yitru Na'or B'Choysha Chunira Or Mavik Chulu. It's just that why do you see any light there at all is because it's so dark. But afterwards, it'll be that the Noiga, or the Chashmal of the Noiga, will go up and it'll be actually higher than the light itself. It'll be higher than the light of Chochmah. And that's basically like what we're saying over here, that even though, like right now, we have a little tiny bit of light, and the only reason you can see the light is because of the darkness. But as we go along, you see, and you can really see that it's going to happen, that this light that we're making of bringing this thing into Dafka in Yonim of total gasus, like cats, will actually bring it up to the supernal light that's bigger than even the light of the Torah Gluyot. The Chashma will go and become an even bigger light than the light. The light which is the real Ein, the light of the Ein, because this will be a light of Ayesh. And it's not just going to be a thing that You know, like that's why everybody has the idea that, oh, it can't be explained, it can only be experienced, and only only in the olden days, only a great tzaddik could see it. He says, yeah, that's right, in the olden days, because there was no way of an ain.
Right.
But we're going to have it in a way of a yesh, and go even deeper than what was the original ain. And have it in the way of a yesh. And it'll still be an ain. You say, how could it be a yesh and it be an ain? You say, look at this whole thing. This whole thing is in a way of a total yeshus and an explanation, and yet it's a total ain. It's the actual ain alakit. And it'll even go higher into the yesh amiti, the actual etzem amor, a bigger light.
Right.
Aval avhaka sa'or mitat etzem ha'or, but we're talking now not because the avhaka sa'or, because it's in the darkness, so you have a tiny little light in the darkness, so it's shiny. We're talking the avhaka sa'or mitat etzem ha'or, because there's a lot of light. Kasher halavush atzmo asri me'or bayar mavik b'yosher. Because chusis abhiro mavik b'yosher nikras especularia nahara. Especularia me'ira. You know what especularia me'ira? Especularia means like glasses.
Spectacles. Same root.
A spectacle, right. A glass.
A lens.
A lens. There's a thing, you know, that there's the thing that the doctor looks inside your ear.
Yeah.
It has a light in it.
Right.
So he can look even in a dark place. This is called a specularia me'ira. This is called the upper light. This is called the Ziva Shechina, and really even higher. You ready?
Go ahead.
Okay, the basic Indian of 46 is basically several very, very important inyanim are here. One is the Indian of, basically it all goes around the chashmal. Now, there's various inyanim that are connected with it, and it's basically the Indian of the letters. The basic Indian of Toyu is in here, including the Indian of the 8th king of Toyu, and how the 8th king of Toyu turns into Mashiach ben Yosef. And the whole Indian of the Golus and the Chaloimis, the Dormisa, the Zoh, various, all kinds of things. And also he explains here the Indian of Noiga and the beginning of the Klippa. So this is a very, very important chapter. And all of these inyanim are all related. That's why they're all connected together. Now the basic thing here, we're going to start first of all with the basic thing of the 8th king of Toihu. First we're going to start with the whole thing of Toihu and the Klippas. Is the basic Indian is that the letters are mixed up. That's the whole basic Indian. You know, like what we learned before, that both in letters of speech and letters of machshava, there's the Indian of the letters themselves as they are letters, and then there's the Indian of the letters in order.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when Shmuley called me from Israel, that was one of the things he didn't understand. He said there's 3 levels in speech. It says here there's 3 levels in speech, and he only saw 2 levels, the chaimer and the letters. So I told him, no, in the letters it says there are 2 levels. One is the letters themselves, like Aleph or Beis or Gimel. And secondly is the letters in order, and that's called the Tzura Shabadibur. In other words, the Tzura
also Machshava Shabadibur.
Huh?
Machshava Shabadibur.
No, tzura. When you're speaking.
Right.
Actual
Okay.
speech.
Right.
In other words, in your actual speech, there's three things. Right now, when I'm speaking, there's three things you hear. One is the chaimer of the speech, which the chaimer of the speech
Wouldn't
is
that be
the
like
voice
Maisa
that's coming
Shabadibur?
out.
Wouldn't that be Maisa Shabadibur?
Huh?
Wouldn't that be like Maisa Shabadibur? And
We're
then
not talking about mice. We're talking about the chaimer.
Right. Okay. I'm
There's
just
the
saying.
chaimer of the chaimer of the
sound.
Huh?
The raw sound.
The raw sound that the speech is made of, right. Then the tzura shabadibur is the final actual speech, which meaning the speech in order, that's what you're understanding. The tzura. The tzura.
The form of the words, you mean, and the
The
sound
form
of it?
the final form of the words. That's what you're understanding. You are understanding it because it's in a form.
Right.
A
Do you have the
certain
raw
letter,
sound? Do you have the form of the
a
word?
certain letter precedes another letter. If I was really drunk and I was slurring my letters and mixing them up, you might not understand exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
So it's the order of the letters, which is the tzura of the speech, which is what you're understanding. And then there's also the letters themselves. But even though they're in order, but there's still the inyan of each letter by itself. Which when I'm saying the letters, I'm saying aleph or a beis or a gimel. And that's the components, which are made out of, there's the general chaimer, there's the components, which are made out of its general chaimer, and then there's the final order that the components are put into.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Right. Now, the basic thing, and this is basically the same thing in thought also, that there's basically the components of it, which are the letters, and the final tzura. Now, the components, which are the letters, are lav davka just aleph or a base. There's also the bigger components that get put into even bigger components. Like there's the letters, the words, and the sentences. So, for instance, even the words, if you take a certain sentence and mix the words around, you can actually change the whole meaning. Right?
Right.
Sometimes by changing a word around, even sometimes by changing a comma, putting a comma in a different place, you can change the whole meaning of the sentence from one thing to the total opposite.
Right.
So the thing, though, is that the tzura comes from Malchus of Tvuna. The final tzura of the speech of the understanding means that the tzura is really in the seichel.
Right.
However, in the speech itself, or even in the machshava, once the machshava becomes a separate thing, which means like when you're talking inside your head, it's basically a chashmal. What does that mean? It means that it's not really the original thing. The chashmal comes out of bina, which means that the letters come out and becomes into actual letters, so therefore they can be felt and they can be transmitted. Chashmal. That's the good part about the chashmal. However, once they become into letters of chashmal, that's where the bilbul can come in. And the bilbul comes in various ways. There's various kinds of bilbul. One is where they get actually mixed up.
Right.
Another one, which is not so bad, but really can turn out just as bad or even worse, is where an idea comes out of Malchus of Tvuna as an application for a certain framework of time or space, and then the chashmal continues to exist past the framework of time or space when it's related to. Huh?
time that it's still applicable.
Applicable, right. And this is basically like when people are in a reactionary idea or something like that, you know.
They're already acting it by reflex rather than...
Right. And not seeing how it really applies to what is coming out now.
Right.
So that's the whole Indian of the Bilbul and the Indian of the Melech HaToihu. And that's the whole Indian of of Toihu is the Bilbul Oisius. And this Bilbul Oisius and the Toihu is what causes the Klippas. The Klippas come out of the Chashmal, like he explains what the Noiga is here. And from the Noiga come even a bigger Bilbul to the point where the thing of the Noiga is just a Masach. In other words, the basic difference between the Masach of Noiga and the Masach of Klippas Atmeus is basically like this. That the Masach of Noiga is like, for instance, in this book here, is that the book is in the proper order.
Right.
But it's lav davka, you can understand it. Like you see a lot of people look at it and they don't understand. It's a masach.
Right.
It covers up on the idea.
Right.
But nonetheless, itself is a proper order. If you read the book, you'll get the right order. Then there's a thing where the order actually becomes messed up so that even if you understand what it means the wrong thing altogether. It actually means the wrong thing.
Right.
Like the Communist Manifesto. Even if you understand it, it's not the right thing. You see the difference here?
Yeah, of course.
Over here, it's a noiga, means the problem is not that there's something wrong with it. It could be kedusha, but you don't understand it.
Right.
Over there, it's total tumah, even if you do understand it. So that's the basic inyanim of Toihu and Klippas. And the basic thing then is that in Toihu, there was and this is basically, this whole chapter is about what is, how this whole thing happened. This whole Indian came about with the Pirura Oisius and the Chashmal, and basically with all the Chashmals that are running in people's minds. And that's basically what these Chashmals are, is ideas.
Right.
But it's ideas made of letters, where the letters travel from one person to the next, like from father to son, for instance. And then the idea is now has its own life.
Right. They coagulated.
Separate from the original intellect that created it. Why? How could it be? Why? Because, like he explains here, that really the source of the Chashmal is higher than the actual intellect itself. Yeah, and this is also tied into the Indian of the letters. Like you look in Shaar HaYichud about how you do tshuva, it says you can do tshuva in the midos, it won't help, and then you have to do it in the seichel. And really, when you do it in the seichel, it also won't help, because you have to do it in the ratzon.
Right.
And the tainug. And even if you do it in the ratzon and the tainug, but still those letters can come back, and they're still there, and they have a life of their own.
Right, exactly.
Not only that, even what he says there is they can't even be destroyed.
Right.
Like what he finally tells you to do there is you have to wash them with tears.
Right.
Means you can't get rid of them.
You can just cleanse them.
You can just cleanse them and put them in the proper order.
Right.
Now, by the way, there's one thing also that, for instance, there's a thing about the order, that the proper order has a special mila even if they're not cleansed. Like, for instance, there could be letters made out of gold, and there could be letters made out of common ore. Right?
Right.
In other words, there's a thing, it explains in various places in Chassidus, that besides the fact of the order of the letters, is the Inyan that the letters themselves are dirty. The letters of a lustful machshava, for instance, besides the fact that in the wrong order, the letters themselves are dirty.
Right.
Mamish, the letters themselves are dirty.
Right.
However, let's say I would give you a thing with letters made out of cow manure, which wrote down on it with these letters the number of a Swiss bank account with $10 billion in it.
Right.
So, does that detract from the bank account?
Not at all.
Not really. And that's the whole thing of the letters of Chassidus. Why the letters of Chassidus can even take letters made out of cow manure and tell you about a bank account with $10 billion in it. And that has to do with sometimes the order of the letter can actually supersede the fact that the letters themselves are impure.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And basically, they this is the basic thing of the thing of the eighth king of Toihu is that the eighth king of Toihu, even though he's the worst king, but it's nonetheless Bina of Toihu, which the Shvira and Bina, if you look in some of the things like in Eitz Chaim and things like that, even though it's very hard to understand what they're talking about, but one thing you can understand is that the Shvira and Bina is not a full Shvira.
It's not an actual Shvira.
It's not an actual Shvira. In other words, what he says in Kesser, there was hardly any Shvira of Nakudim, and then in Chochmah there was a tiny little bit of a Shvira, and in Bina there is kind of a Shvira, but really the Shvira is in the Bechain.
Right.
It's not really in the Pnimius Bina. In other words, in the actual analysis, the original analysis is correct.
Right.
Like, for instance, there's a lot of people in the world.
Right.
The Bechain, that you should kill babies, that's where the Shvira is. It's in the Bechain, not in the original analysis. And also in all kinds of various other things, like in terms of the various, like scientific things that, you know, the observations and stuff like that, and the analyses, there's no Shvira there. The Shvira is in the conclusions they draw.
Right.
And the conclusions they draw from it. That's what the Shvira is.
Right.
However, the Inyan of the eighth king of Toyu himself is that Bina, by its nature, will have to keep going through these conclusions and testing them.
Right.
And sooner or later, he'll come up with the fact that there's something wrong with his conclusion.
Right.
But then he'll try another conclusion. Now, really, this could take forever.
Right.
And that's what it says. It's really a chesed. It's that really this world could take forever. And that's what it said. There's Shakai and Shindalit Yud.
Right.
He said die to his world.
Right.
Really?
Die.
Die, right. And what does it mean, die? It means that really this thing of the eighth king of Toyu could take forever.
Right.
Because he could come up with a whole new set of Meshigasas.
Right. There's no end to Meshigasas.
There's no end to Meshigasas. He could come up with a new, okay, well, this theory is no good. Okay, fine. So here's another crazy theory.
Right.
And he can come up with no end to Meshigasas. And what is the die? A die is that basically he interjected. It said that, you know, that Abishur originally wanted to create the world with only din.
Right.
And he had to inject Rachamim.
Right.
And what was that? That he took tzaddikim and he put them in every generation.
Right.
And that's the basic thing of Mashiach ben Yosef. That Mashiach ben Yosef comes, and he has to come, though, it has to be Dafka at a time when it's the time of the eighth king of Toivu. And then he interjects the proper formula. He says, here, look, this is what it is. In other words, this is an interjection. It's not just the eighth king of Toy who came up with this idea.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It's not just that, the scientists will keep looking and finally they'll figure out, yeah, but it could take like 15 billion years.
Right.
It could take even longer.
Right.
But he says enough, and he came up and he says, here, take a look at this. Take a look at this, here. And people look and say, oh, hey, that makes sense.
Right.
You know. And that's the Yosef Peitach Halemis, that he comes up and he tells everybody here, this is the proper pitaron for the Shiloh.
Right.
You know, there's a question, like a scientific question, and then there's various hypotheses, and say, here, take a look at this one. Here, this is it. This is the one. Take a look at this. This will show you the whole thing. You know. Like if you want to know, for instance, the answer, how come there's lights, how come there's waves and quantums, lights and vessels. Or if you want to know how come the psychology works in a certain way. Which is, all of these are questions they're asking.
Right.
You know. So the eighth king of Toihu doesn't really actually turn into, it talks here as if he turns into Mashiach ben Yosef. But it's not, it doesn't really. It has to come from a tikkun of the new Shema of Ak, meaning that it's really taken from upstairs. So it's a tikkun from upstairs. In other words, the Eibusher in his Torah gave this over to us, and the Rebbe's brought it down. And this tikkun, like for instance, this tikkun that we're making, for instance. Right now, we're making the tikkun of Mashiach ben Yosef, for Yosef Peitach Haloimis.
Right.
But it's not that we figured it out because of our great intellect. It's not really true. We didn't really figure it out because of our great intellect. It was given to us by the Mittler Rebbe. I mean, actually, it was given to us by the Rebbe, who gave us the whole Chassidus, and then gave us this book and the abilities to learn it.
Right.
You know, he trained us with, when we learned first, we learned Siches and Maimarim and stuff like that, and then he gave us this book. And then the Eibusher dumped us in the middle of the internet, the Nilus of the eighth king of Toihu. You know, like the baby Moshe that was dumped into the Nile with his in a tiny little, you know, there's a big river and there's a baby in a basket. That's sort of like where we are. You know, we're almost like, you know, like we're this teeny little thing floating in the giant, you know, he can't even see us, you know.
Right.
In this giant cyberspace. You know, there's all kinds. I mean, if you look what's going on there, you know, who's ever, like we say, we're going to take over the world. Who's even going to see us?
Right.
You know, but nonetheless, that's how it's working. So the thing is that it's an injection of light from above, really.
Right.
But the injection has to be done dafka when it's a time of the eighth king of Toihu, and that's basically, I mean, the thing is that he's not just talking over here about just abstract things over here. He's talking about a real thing, you know. I mean, he's talking, it says the Golus Dim Shalacholam, and the Dormita Zoh, and the Mashiach will come and save us. He's talking about an actual historical thing that's going to happen.
Right.
You know. And this is one of the very important things, that's one of the big toihus. One of the big bilbulim in terms of understanding Kabbalah and Chassidus is that people understand it as some kind of abstract thing.
Right.
And they don't understand it as something that has to do with the price of tomatoes.
Right.
You know. And this is talking about really something that's happening right now. Not only that, it's talking about the basic history of the world, and now this here is talking about the time of the eighth king of Toihu, turning into, and then Yosef Paitach Haloimis is talking about what's happening right now, a real thing, and we're in this column of the Golus of the Ramita Zazor, you know.
Right.
So this is what the basic thing is. The whole Indian. I mean, I just wanted to, like before we learned it in the way of Bina. I just wanted to put it, you know, like in the beginning of the book, as chapter 1 and chapter 2. You should always put it in the way of Tuna to apply it down to here. In other words, it's not just talking about like Hashmals is something up there, like the holy Hashmal, you know.
Right.
It's talking to Hashmals. You can see it floating, and you can see the Hashmals in people's brains. That's what a Hashmal is. You know. So basically, I mean, we the inyanim of the chapter. I mean, we all know. I mean, and the whole thing, you know, with the candle, talk about the hara and the Evan Toiv, that it's after when you bring it into Chumrius, that's where it glows. But the final thing is that the final thing of the Kutnas Or is not just the fact that it's a candle and it doesn't glow so much, but you can see it because it's in the dark. But the final thing is that it's going to turn into a big light.
Right.
A real big light. And that's the whole business what's going to happen. The Indian of the Kutnas or Ayin turning into an Aleph. So that's the basic thing here.
Start off the tape?
Yeah, that was it.